Since we're going to be smashing through the Marvel Universe today, we should probably fuel up with a delicious bowl of Magic Spoon, who's sponsoring today's video. Whether you're an X-Men, an Avenger, or an Imperfect, you're going to need more protein, less sugar, and 4 to 5 net grams of carbs per serving if you're going to have a chance at stopping any vague alien force coming your way. In addition to core flavors like birthday cake and blueberry muffin, now is also the perfect time to check out the limited edition cocoa peanut butter and pumpkin spice flavors, which will be available for a limited time. Some of you may know I'm something of a cereal scientist myself, and Magic Spoon's been a great choice for me for those midnight snacking urges, and they've also been incredible in supporting the show. So if you'd like $5 off the custom cereal bundle of your choice, enter the code McMuscles at checkout, scan the QR code you see here, or go to magicspoon.com/McMuscles to start your cereal adventure today. Thanks again to Magic Spoon, and without further ado, it's clobberin' time! Hello and welcome to another car-smashing and attempted cash-grabbing episode of What Happened, the internet-based pop culture media show that unearths some of the most forgotten development histories in entertainment history. And when you're talking about video games, and specifically superhero-based video games, the very brief collaboration between Electronic Arts and Marvel Comics certainly stands out as one of those forgettable projects. This titanic team-up was supposed to herald its own mini-universe with sequels, more comic books, spin-offs, etc., but as we'll discuss, was snuffed out with barely an audible whimper. So strap on your web shooters and insert your weird metal node things as I answer the question, what happened to Marvel Nemesis: Rise of the Imperfects?
You gotta be kidding!
The 90s and 2000s were a wild time for superhero games, as each and every publisher wanted their own small piece of the Marvel, DC, and to a much lesser extent the Image universe pies. This is in stark contrast to today, where 1 to 2 publishers seek out multi-game deals and then lock that shit down for years. And by the early 2000s, Capcom's agreement with Marvel to produce fighting games featuring their characters was coming to a close, signaling the end of the ride it had all taken us on. Perhaps seeing the platinum-selling success Activision was having with its movie-based adaptations of Spider-Man, Electronic Arts made a pitch to Marvel to team up on a new venture that would be very different from the colorful, hyper-fast 2D games of the late 90s. EA's Vancouver studio was assigned to this task, which was to bring together a number of well-known Marvel heroes and villains, but also to establish a new continuity and cast of characters to populate it. I spoke to Mark O'Bonnell, a former producer from EA Canada, on how they went about this process. This was in the early days when Marvel was reimagining itself as more than just comics, buying back their rights to movies and games before Disney purchased them. The game, Marvel Nemesis, was produced out of the Vancouver studios. We did not have enough folks to form a team at the beginning, so we only had a producer, technical director, animation director, art director, and UI designer on staff in Canada, maybe a few other roles at the beginning. We then went on the hunt for a great developer and were really impressed by StarCraft Ghost, so we partnered up with Nihilistic to co-develop the game. Ah yes, Nihilistic Software, who, as Mark mentioned, had previously worked on the first version of something that did essentially ghost the entire gaming industry, which I chronicled in this video here. Aside from that, the only other thing they shipped was 2000's Vampire the Masquerade Redemption, a dungeon-crawling RPG that I honestly have zero memory of. With that said, I think it's fairly safe to say that Nihilistic as a cohesive team didn't have a whole lot of experience by the time they were asked to create a 3D brawler/fighting game that incorporated a number of licensed characters as well as all new ones across 3 different console platforms. Not to mention, there were also 2 handheld versions that EA also greenlit for the PSP and Nintendo DS, which meant this became more than one studio could handle. As to why they went with a fighter instead of, an action game or RPG, well, that's because they didn't have a whole lot of choice. During this era, Marvel licensed out their characters for usage in specific genres to specific publishers, and Activision, at that time, had the action RPG rights all snapped up via their X-Men Legends series, as well as the in-development Ultimate Alliance. This lack of choice was something Mark reiterated in my conversation with him. We were contractually bound to be a fighting game, so it was never possible to be another genre. We knew that we were going to be compared to Street Fighter, so we didn't want a close combat mechanic. This doesn't make sense as so many Marvel characters have long-range attacks. We took a lot of inspiration from Power Stone on Dreamcast. Beautiful, which had, in our estimation, one of the best mechanics for close-up and distance melee fighting at the time. Even with that solid foundation, there were still 3 different companies who needed to go back and forth on every single element, especially character design for the titular Imperfects. These brand new heroes and villains were, and remain, a point of contention though, and the early secrecy and confusion around them is partially why Marvel Nemesis is now being discussed on a show called What Happened. In June 2004, EA vs. Marvel was indeed announced as a thing that was happening, which caused a lot of skepticism amongst a lot of fans. After several clashes with Capcom, everyone was scratching their heads on how a similar battle between Marvel and EA would work, and you can't really blame them. The prospect of a football player going toe-to-toe with Dr. Doom, although hilarious, didn't sound particularly viable. It didn't help that the very first interview about the project between IGN and then head of Marvel game development Ames Kirshen kind of doubled down on that negative first impression. As you know, we've taken the Marvel vs. license we had with Capcom, which was very successful throughout the 90s, an extremely successful fighting series, and we saw an opportunity with EA, the #1 publisher in the industry, to take that premise of Marvel versus another company's characters and take that to the next level. I expect EA to make an announcement in the next few months, giving some idea of what we're doing with these games. And over the course of the next few months, EA had to do just that by clarifying, no, you wouldn't be seeing its established franchises throwing hands with the likes of Ben Grimm or Matt Murdock, but instead a new team of characters with edgy backstories and low color saturation that would snugly fit into the Marvel universe. At least that was the idea. It took until March 2005, almost 9 months later, for mainstream fans to finally and officially be introduced to Marvel Nemesis: Rise of the Imperfects, and the reaction was divisive. Those long months without any concrete details ultimately hurt the game's impact and fans' perception of it, a sentiment shared by the gaming media, like the following GameSpot article from just a few weeks after the unveiling. Details have been scarce on the game since word of its existence started trickling out, which led it to be christened Marvel vs. EA, a catchier sounding title than unannounced fighting game featuring Marvel and EA characters. EA and Marvel have both been silent while comic and fighting game aficionados commiserated on the internet as to whether the fighter would be the best or worst game ever. In that same piece, GameSpot spoke to EA's Dan Ayub, who at least seemed to be aware of this issue. What can you tell us about the EA characters? Well, characters like the SSX skiers? That actually should be Borders.
Yeah, that's right.
Or a Need for Speed Underground car be included as well? Heh, I always love that one. When we initially announced this project, we got a lot of heat from gamers about the EA characters. I'm excited to watch the reaction to the new characters that EA has created, because some people out there will be surprised. I cannot tell you too much about the new characters right now, but the reactions we are getting to them are very positive. And I think people are going to just love these new heroes. No, they didn't. Johnny Ohm, Wink, Niles Van Rocken, and the others, while I'm sure had their fans, didn't quite hit in the same way that Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Iron Man did. It's really hard to pull off something like this, suddenly making brand new personalities who could stand alongside much more established legacy characters, and Marvel Nemesis reinforced that difficulty.
It is my curse to be alive.
While EA were trying to put out those fires of perception, Nihilistic were busy with their own. With only a few short months left before the game's September release, a myriad of technical problems were slowing down progress. We had lots of development issues. We were using a third-party render engine, will remain unnamed, that caused an enormous amount of issues. This included a crash bug. When the camera was at a certain angle, the game would randomly crash, very unpredictable. We spent months trying to track it down and eventually had to lock the camera so that it wouldn't render at an angle, as we could never fix the bug. We also have the typical challenge of understanding the realities of game development and a publisher who expects everything to be a smash hit. We knew that between Nihilistic and EA, we had little combined fighting game experience. That comment about expecting everything to be a smash hit rings true. Marvel's steady growth throughout the mid-2000s as they continually licensed their properties to be adapted into films and other media, coupled with EA's commercial stranglehold on much of the gaming sector, led to high internal expectations about the Imperfects' chances at financial success. Expectations that were going to be dashed by both its critical reception and a 1-2 punch from old EA arch nemesis, Activision. Rise of the Imperfects released on September 20th, 2005 in North America, which was a very busy time for the industry. Not only did Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks release just a few days earlier, please remaster or remake this Ed, I'm begging you here, but so did Sly Cooper 3, Burnout Revenge, and Ninja Gaiden Black. Most damaging of all though, in a very cheeky move, Activision released a duo of their most anticipated Marvel titles, Ultimate Spider-Man and X-Men Legends 2, and both on the exact same day as Nemesis. Not only that, the critical reception to the Imperfects was well behind both of those efforts, so if you were a Marvel fan sitting on the fence, there were even more reasons to ignore Johnny Ohm than just the obvious.
You kidding, right?
Reviews cited the game's lack of content, certain characters like Captain America and others being platform exclusives, fairly milquetoast gameplay, numerous bugs, and imprecise combat mechanics as some, but not all of the negatives. Although praise was given to the presentation, graphical effects, lighting, and solid online modes, for the PS2 and Xbox at least. Oh, sorry little GameCube. Mark Obanel was pretty frank regarding the game's reception and the expectations Nihilistic had for it. The dev team never thought we would hit it out of the park on the first version, and were really looking at developing it for the long term. The publisher, though, wanted instant success out of all titles, and it struggled to gain traction when it performed as the team expected, but not EA. The team really thought of this as a B+ title, moving towards AAA in the long term. The game recouped its investment, but like many EA titles, was plagued by a lot of criticism. A Metacritic rating of 53 on PS2 was brutal, but the user score was a bit better. That's probably due to the fact that most 15-year-olds were blown away when Spider-Man used incredibly filthy, offensive language.
You know what we call that? We call that a web-slinging ass-kicking.
Jesus Christ, dude, chill. The low sales and poor reviews weren't exclusive to the game though, as even the printed page couldn't get the Imperfects over. The 6-issue Marvel miniseries chronicling the game's events, which lasted from late 2005 to early 2006, wasn't really lighting comic book store shelves on fire, and once it concluded, none of the Imperfects appeared again in any guise in any corner of the Marvel universe. In fact, the Imperfects weren't even going to show up in the theoretical sequel, which has gone by many names but is most commonly known as Marvel Chaos. EA decided it would be better to move the entirety of the development of this sequel to one of their internal studios, in this case EA Chicago, makers of Fight Night and Def Jam icon.
You play me like a bitch.
Marvel Chaos was never officially announced though, so you're excused if you had no idea it was at one point a thing. In the subsequent years since its cancellation, we've only seen a few glimpses via various screens, concept art, early alpha footage, and a very janky, very unstable leaked build. It did seem like it was going in the right direction though, as the move to more powerful hardware allowed for dynamic, fully 3D fights that would level entire city blocks, and adopted a classic but still novel golden and silver age approach to the presentation. It didn't get all that far, however, before the EA top brass decided to snap their fingers and poof the entire thing out of existence. The cited reason for the sudden cancellation? The cost of running the Chicago studio was deemed too high. And yeah, EA just chained up the doors one day. And of course, a few short years later, the Chicago studio's former head, Kudo Tsunoda, went on to reveal what the bottom of an Avatar shoe looked like. No, don't show the clip. Nihilistic fortunately did go on to produce a few more titles, including Conan, Resistance Burning Skies, and Call of Duty Declassified, oof, which I'll probably need to talk about one day. As for Marvel, well, after the EA deal went bust, they went crawling back to Capcom, who produced the fan-favorite Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Ultimate MVC3, and... oh, yeah. Yeah, if you know of any other marvelously messy developments in the video game or movie industries, do let me know in the comments below or hit up any of the socials you see on your screen. And thanks again to Mark Obanel for his time and patience in answering my questions. Until then, Excelsior, true believers, and I'll see you next time on the mediocre Spider-Man. What happened?